Kia ora.
Not so familiar with the specifics in your ward, but we can come back to you on that if you'd like.
Okay,
Okay, they'll do that. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to move to strengthening council's financial and physical resilience, which will go up there on the wall, haven't you? This is about making space for waters, the future fund, and there'll be lots of questions on this, absolutely, I'm sure. So we're going to get through this, then we might have lunch, but we're going to, otherwise we'll never get through for evening. So who wants to kick this one away? No questions? Councillor Walker.
I've just got a question around what we're proposing to go out for Port of Auckland. I'm assuming
Don't be alarmed, I think it's just some staff coming to answer questions.
I like to give the officers sufficient time to be ensconced. So my question is that we've got options. In order for the public to be able to evaluate options, we need to provide some financials. In particular, as far as the port is concerned, the sort of enhanced status quo, which is, you know, continuing the port on the current site, I understand has projections on the parts of Port of Auckland that amount to $1 million a week, that it's close to now, if not achieving, to $2 million a week, and maybe even other scenarios that are better than that. So are we going to be supplying that sort of information to Aucklanders so they can see the advantages of the present management that appears to be pretty damn good?
I think, yes, the proposal here, if agreed, would be to go out in the consultation document with options around an operating lease proposal and an enhanced status quo, which would show under that status quo arrangement with those returns what they would be. So yes, the consultation documents would make those numbers very clear. And
further to that, in respect of the proposal to take back some port land, and that might involve various wharves, Captain Cook and the like, are we going to be communicating that there is a cost to council for that? Because the port under the Ports Act has to operate commercially. And will, in addition to that, we be informing Aucklanders around the state of those wharves, that is, the significant repairs required?
Yeah, through you, Chair. So the information which goes up for consultation will contain all the relevant information to enable the public to make informed comments.
So is that a yes to the question that I'm asking, which is specifically around the costs of purchasing those wharves and the resultant cost to council of repairs to those wharves, which are likely to be considerable because they're aged?
If I could just jump in there, John, I think with respect to the cost of the wharves, if council parent was to need to purchase that land from the Ports of Auckland, that's still within the group construct, so it doesn't impose an additional burden on the council group. It's within the group itself. With respect to any ongoing maintenance, that counterfactual or that situation exists under both scenarios. We have provided advice back to councillors in workshops around the impacts of various land options on the commercial aspects of the port, and those aspects would be reflected in any consultation document to the extent that those options are decided upon by council for consultation.
So let me restate the question. is it possible to have the costs, irrespective of whether those costs might be transferred or not, together with the costs of any repairs, irrespective of whether those costs are transferred or not, so that Aucklanders have that information? Because the port is an asset that is in part held at arm's length, and I don't need to go into the financial and legal intricacies around that. So I'm asking a relatively simple question because I think I would like to know that information, and I'm sure Aucklanders deserve to know it.
I think I explained that there is no impact on the ratepayers of a payment between two entities within the group, and as such, it's not a aspect we've got into, particularly at this point where it's options assessment, and we're working through what council might like to do in that space, which would be subject to the results post-consultation, assuming it goes out to consultation.
So with respect, that does not answer my question. It obfuscates my question. So my question stands. Yes, the Chief Operating Officer seems to have some reluctance to answer it, but nevertheless my question stands. Thank you.
Point of order, Mayor. That disrespectful behaviour, I think the question was clearly answered, and then we had a comment about the way the staff member answered it, and I think that is unfair.
I accept that, and I think that what we'll do is he's not obfuscating it. We're trying to point out what are the things that impact. If, for instance, it will have no impact on rates either way, whatever that situation is. Somebody in our group has to fix that wharf, and somebody in our group will own that. And so we're probably really looking at things which will impact ratepayers. And so the answer is we can find out how much it may or may not want to repair in those wharfs, but that depends on what you want to do with them. And the thing is, if the wharf needs to be repaired, then perhaps Ports of Auckland should be doing that in the first place, but not at the moment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, supplementary question. A transaction such as this does impact on the port, does impact on the port's asset, does impact on the 35-year lease. We are talking about assets that are currently being used for port's operations, at least in part or in full. So my question remains. Thank you.
That doesn't seem to be producing an answer which is meeting with your requirements. So perhaps we've got another question there. No, at the moment. Well, you reserve your right to have another one. You can have another one if you feel so inclined. Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you, Mayor. My first question is to the last point in that around the advanced work to reduce council emissions and reach net zero by 2050. Obviously, that is our current policy, but there's also another policy in there around working towards halving our emissions by 2030. Does leaving that comment out change our policy, or are you just leaving that as a high-level policy and our other Te Tarakia, Tawhiri, etc. stand?
It's kind of there as an ambitious thing we're aiming for, a bit like Road to Zero and all those ones, and nobody smoking. I think we should be leaving it in there. It's an important thing that we do work towards meeting that.
Oh, no, sorry.
It's more like that than actual financial impact, I think.
No, I definitely agree with that being in there. I guess maybe for staff, just to clarify, does that change our policy at all, because we aren't mentioning the attempt to halve our emissions by 2030 as well? We're not, by omitting that, are we changing our policy, or is that just the mere, our climate risks, etc.?
I think it's kind of a background thing to that, and also focusing on the fact that the future fund is kind of one of the tools that we came up with that to very much meet our council emissions and provide some form of resilience, which clearly the city exposed that it didn't have earlier this year.
Okay, thank you. On the future fund, which I think is a good idea, there has been some confusion around the airport shares being a part of that. My understanding is that what the attempt is, and it might be for staff or for the mayor, the attempt is that we're getting about, 1 to 2% dividends, return on investment at the moment, or projected on the airport holding, but we would be putting in a future fund and then they would be looking to buy other shares which look to make more money for the council. Is that the case? Maybe just from...
I think that it's two things come out of that. A, the long-term performance of superannuation funds, like the New Zealand superannuation one, which would be a very likely purchaser of the port lease, actually.
Sorry, I'm just trying to focus on the airport shares for now.
Yeah, I
if
realise,
that's
no,
okay.
but I just raised that the long-term performance of superannuation funds has been around about 8 or 9%. And so, whereas the long-term returns for our airport shares has been more like 2. And so we would like to get them to, the idea is that a fund would then fund at least as much as the cost of the debt to hold it back to us, and the rest would be used to build the fund bigger and bigger and bigger, so we've got something available. That's some money size. The other part of it is to diversify the positioning of our assets, because one of the first things that flooded in Auckland was the airport. And so at a time when we're going to need it, to rely upon a non-functioning asset is not a particularly healthy situation to put yourself in. So it was diversity and returns, just so, and that's whatever it is that we sell. Okay.
Thank you. From John, if I could ask you a question, just how it plays out. I think it's kind of clear in the document, but I just want to make sure that everyone knows what it means, and that you could describe how it works. So essentially those shares would be transferred, and then within parameters that we set, they would be buying and selling shares that make that target higher figure.
Yeah. So through you, Chair, as the Mayor's outlined, the idea would be to have those shares put into this fund, and then the investment manager, within the parameters set out, would diversify that investment. And as the Mayor pointed out, you get geographical and financial diversity, and you would get, over time, those likely higher financial returns.
And on the airport shares, because the dividends are there whether we do this or not. So could you just reiterate that the projected dividends are far lower than what we expected even in the last budget? Is that correct? Have we factored that in if this doesn't go ahead?
Yeah, through you, Chair. So the revised dividend policy of the airport, which is essentially reducing their dividend policy from a target of 100% of essentially net profit to a midpoint of 80%, that has been reflected in the revised figures.
And without upsetting the share market or anything, could you just talk about some of the risks? In my opinion, the two things are quite different, shares and port. But what you're trying to say, what the Mayor's trying to say is that there's a lot more risk with the airport and holding it all together because of what we saw at the floods maybe, and maybe with their investment program.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, I think if you look at what happens in all superannuation funds and your own KiwiSaver funds, it's not sensible to have all your eggs in one basket. So what we currently have with our financial investments is all our eggs in two baskets, being the airport and the port. So what this fund does quite clearly is diversify that risk. So not just geographically, I invest in assets from all around the world. It's also financial diversification, because you're investing in hundreds, not thousands, of different securities.
Thank you. Some of the advice, and I'm clear on the shares, but I'm less clear on the port. Some of the advice we've had may be confidential, so answer what you can. Is there a time that would make sense if you're looking to lease? We're only just getting back on a good footing with the port. How does someone purchasing judge a price if we may be expecting better, in the next few years? And also, how much can we write into an agreement for purchase up front when so much changes, along with workers' rights, with climate emissions reduction, things like that? And I guess, how does that affect the price? Because obviously I would want to put a lot in there that I feel that to have a say as an Aucklander or as an Auckland councillor, but I'm not clear on what that does to the the price.
Councillor Hills, Mr John Crawford, who has given advice to us, is present. I could bring him forward to the front. He might be able to answer some of your particular investment things.
Okay, I'll just
in a
maybe
better
get
manner.
the finance team first, and then I'm happy to. John, is that okay? I'm not sure.
John, would you like to join the front there, if that's possible? And there will be times at which you can. John has given advice to the investment group.
Is
that all right?
this specific to the discounting of the value if the terms of the lease are written in such a way that meets the satisfaction of all of the councillors? Am I understanding that?
Yes, Councillor
question?
Fletcher.
Because that's an issue that we have explored quite thoroughly, so it would be useful to have Mr Crawford's view on it.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to understand, if I don't want to take up too much time here, is things like, say, if there was New Zealand only purchases, say if there was stronger climate outcomes. How do I know in 10, 15 years' time that the council will be able to go, things have changed, and I'm just, this would be in there till I'm 70-something years old, so it's a big...
Most advisors will tell you the best time to invest it was 20 years ago.
So I guess several questions, sorry, and I guess it's around understanding how something like this rolls out. How much is the price affected by us layering in, I'd probably could imagine 100 things I'd want to put in there as provisos. How does that affect the price? When we're just starting to get back those kind of good gains on the port, is this the right time to be doing this sort of transaction?
So that's on now. So I'd say two things. There is a trade-off between people wanting to see the port's performance improve, and the more sure they are about the port's performance improving, I think the greater the chance you have of obtaining a better price. So that's the first part. But the second thing is that whoever buys the port is unlikely to have the same plans for the port that the current port management do. So they will be buying the port thinking that they can run it in a better way, or that they bring certain attributes to the table that allow them to create greater value. So yes, while the port's improving forecast is important, it's also important to realise that a potential bidder will have a completely different view of how they might want to operate it, and therefore it will have a different value to them.
If I can just clarify that, we're talking about the operations of the port and a long-term lease and retention of the land within that conversation.
Yeah. So another part of your question was the greater restriction on lease in terms of the restrictions on the way someone can operate it, that will be reflected in value. And I think you are going to need some professional advice as to if this is a term of the lease, does it really affect the value of the port or not? And that will come, that'll be part of the process that you go through over the next year or so if you decide to go down the route of a sale of the lease.
So that would include advice on things like, what if we was New Zealand only sale or lease, but selling the lease?
Exactly. So if you wanted to restrict the potential owners to only New Zealand entities, you're likely to obtain a significantly lower price for the asset. You may be able to introduce things which would require a New Zealand company to be part of a consortium, but again, the fewer restrictions you place on things, the higher the likely value is that you will obtain for it.
And it's probably far too much detail, but it is early on. How do the company who purchase it make money without just sweating the assets and reducing the conditions for workers? How would they do it more efficiently without doing those things? Especially if it's a lease and you're looking at the back end of the lease, they're probably not going to invest. Is that?
So I'll answer that. I talked about having a different business plan. You may have an owner who's going to back themselves to take a significant volume of container traffic away from Tauranga. Now, how they do that, I don't know. They may have influence over Maersk. They may be able to offer different things, but someone will have a different way of operating in the port that will mean that the value that they can extract from the port is not necessarily solely from cost reductions or other things. They will have a view as to how they can get greater volume through the ports. So ports are very much a fixed cost business, and the greater the volume that goes through, the greater the profitability of the port.
So just to add to that, I mean, given the 35-year time horizon as well, they've got time to invest capital and get a return from that capital. So they won't be put off putting new capital expenditure into the business.
All right, thank you very much for that. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. I have a question about the shifting Making Space for Water out to be a 10-year rather than a 6-year program. So no offence to the staff in front of us, but I'm not sure if that sits with you guys.
Probably.
Got them online? Awesome.
I
Thanks.
think where I got to from that was in talking closely with the gentleman who runs it, Craig,
Craig, yeah.
that he was feeling they would be struggling to get it all done in 6. And it was likely to cost more if they pushed it faster.
Okay.
Is that
Well,
right, Craig? You were there now, but I got the impression that
Yes, Your Worship.
that if sometimes if you really
confirm
rush
that.
things, the prices go up so much. If you just go steady, you get everything done at a better price. And I think that's where I got to, unless I've got that wrong.
I think with the scale and scope of work that we have to do, Your Worship, 10 years is actually a realistic time. I think 6 years is going to be really pushing the boundaries. Kia ora.
Thanks. Appreciate that. And that's really helpful for me because I was quite dismayed to see that to start with. Some of the early years of this program are actually going to be, and you know what's outlined in here is actually going to be more in the comm space. You know, some of the stuff around flood intelligence, stream rehabilitation, etc., community-led, increasing maintenance. Some of that's going to look like comms, you know, communicating with our community about what we're doing, why we're doing it, what time we're doing it, when they can, how they can log issues, how they can get involved. So I'm just sort of wanting, I guess, a little bit of reassurance when we talk about elsewhere in the document, the need to reduce operational spend on things like that. Actually, it's going to be pivotal with this kind of work. How do you see that playing out, particularly in the early years?
So in the Making Space for Water budget, we've got a appropriate OPEX allowance which recognises the need for a lot of investment in the comms space and a lot of investment in supporting local communities to help deliver the outcomes. This model is only going to work with full community engagement, and as you know, that comes at a cost, but that's been factored into the program because we think ultimately that's the best way to deliver the outcome. Kia ora.
Thanks, Craig. That's reassuring also. So the last question I have in this space, and then I have a question about the Future Fund, is if we go from a 6-year time frame to a 10-year time frame around some of particularly the blue-green network work, we need to consider the impact that might have on 2P and 2Cs in terms of the categorisation process. So has that been taken into account yet, or is that something we're going to have to work through over the next year? Because they've got an expectation, we give a 2P or a 2C based on the ideal, we can do that work within 2 years, or if we're potentially doing this work over a longer period, that might have a flow-on effect. So have we considered that yet?
Yeah, so the property acquisition work will happen as quickly as possible to give the community the certainty that they're looking for around the classification and the buyout process. And then we will just work through the blue-green areas on a priority basis and very much linked to the success of the voluntary acquisition process in order to secure the areas that we need to develop the blue-green spaces. Kia ora.
Thank you. Thanks, Craig. That's all my questions on Making Space for Water. I do have a question around the Future Fund where, and I quite like this idea of the Future Fund. One of the things I'm sort of getting my head around is how these things work. And I'm just wanting to understand, if we're using this partly for self-insurance, what do we do about the lumpiness and the unpredictability of that? You know, how do we actually set this up in a way that takes that into account? Just the examples we've had so far, and acknowledging Max has sent me through another example, but I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, have been around super And obviously with super, you can plan ahead, you know when people are going to turn 65, you know when the big population bulges are. But if we're going to use some of this for self-insurance, that's stuff that's much less certain.
Yeah, through you, Chair, and that's a good question, one we've been giving consideration to and will give more consideration to. So one of the issues with insurance and the various policies we've got, some like, for example, our public liability policy, we can make claims up to 200 million on each and every event. So theoretically, at least, we could have multiple claims, which could go, again, theoretically into the billions. So that is very hard to plan for and run completely through a fund. So one option of many we're thinking about is, if you look where the majority of our premium spend is, it's in our property program, so above and below ground property. That accounts for more than half our premium spend. If we were to, for example, take, say, the first $500 million of risk on both of those policies, that would become a lot more manageable and would still mean we would save sort of estimated sort of $13 million in premiums, but it would sort of contain that long tail insurance risk. So these are just sort of things we are thinking of and doing some analysis of, and we will complete that by the sort of end of January, early February.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner, please.
Thank you. I have trouble connecting the philosophy, the objectives, to reality, and the more of the detail I read, the harder it gets. For instance, we've got up there resilience, physical resilience, etc. And I go to this one here, 164D, cease coal. Cease the importation of coal because it's dirty and dusty, and we have a greener, cleaner port. We were told that $1 million worth of coal that came in the last financial year was just the overflow from Tauranga, and to get it into Huntly when we were in a drought, followed by a flood, because we were short of power until our hydro dams filled up. So, there's resilience in itself. If you don't have that resilient ability, and then the same thing happens again, which we're told it's going to do, then all of a sudden we're back to a 3-month waiting list for generators, for portable generators, like happened at Christmas time, which is far dirtier and more polluting than this single activity. So, we're told Tauranga Port's full. So I just take just that one sentence and say, how am I going to explain to the public how that action there meets that objective there? Because they're all going to look at me and think, just reiterate what I've just said. Where's the measurement? How, going back to what I said the first time, the one thing I see missing in this document is how over the next 10 years we're going to have a measurement, a strategy to identify and measure our actions in our climate change objectives, in our resilience objectives, which is it in there, which shows how we're meeting these things together. Where is it in this document?
I think I would go back to the purpose of today around being clear on what you want to consult on and going out on those aspects. There is a session later on around performance measures, which goes to some of that. And we have had sessions around the climate-related financial disclosures and some of the GHG dimensions. But really today is around deciding on what you want to consult on. Those are the decisions you're making today, and then further information being provided to support that going forward. As part of that, the fiscal transparency and performance measures within the LTP have to be adequate to show the community that what is being spent is delivering to what was going to be achieved from that spend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may just then, I support this wide sweeping way for people to reply. Sorry, hang on. I think it's a very good idea to have this really open discussion. But I do think we're missing one thing in there, and that is a matrix of how we are going to measure the connectivity of all our different desires. Thanks.
Well, it's a big complex business and it's a big complex thing, and I think we'll try and talk your way out of it. In terms of the coal, it's actually quite a low profit area as well, and there are plenty of other ports that will take it in at the time if that ever gets to be there. I think the main reason it's going to come off coal is the government have agreed to change the major user of coal, being the steel plant, to a power-based plant, and so that the port themselves are expecting to have less coal in there. I got that from the actual chief executive of the port, Roger, who's somewhere or other. Roger, you're not expecting? Oh, you're out there. You're not expecting more coal, is from what I understand.
Coal will come and go, but it's not a growth industry for us, and we do see it as a sunset trade in the future. Yes.
The sound quality is not good.
I think he said he saw it as a sunset trade, for those of you who didn't hear very well. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions? And Councillor Lee, please.
Yes, in terms of asset sales, there's a line here about 308 million asset sales. What asset? 300 million. Sorry. What is envisaged by asset sales in this target of 300 million over 10 years? What are we talking about here?
Ross Churnside will come up and give some advice on that.
I wonder whether we should hold that until that part of the session. That's later on the agenda.
Those are kind of, what he's got in there is not some huge thing.
Okay.
It's a whole lot of small regional facilities. That
This is not the big, obviously not the big items you want to sell. Okay.
This is, sorry, for instance, if the Rodney Council want to flog a building there and repurpose it somewhere else.
Okay.
So it's a whole lot of small things, okay?
Sure. Situation normal. Now, just moving on to the debt to revenue ratio, it seems to be quite important, and the current limit, as I understand, is 290%. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
That's correct. And what is the current situation with debt to revenue?
So, Chair, around about 250.
250. Okay. I see the roundabout. Okay. I see what we told the public earlier this year. Seems a long time ago, but it was only a few months ago. In regard to the pitch to sell airport shares, was the debt to revenue ratio is currently capped at 290% and currently sits at around 250%. We expect the ratio to shift below 220% with the sale of Auckland International Airport shares. That obviously didn't happen, and so it seems to me that after selling a large percentage of the shares, the debt to revenue ratio is exactly the same as when we started, which, contrary to the promises we made to the public.
Yeah, through you, Chair, you only got one part of the story here. Obviously, the shares were sold to reduce debt, which did happen, and debt was reduced by 830 odd million. Now, if we hadn't sold the shares, quite clearly debt would be higher by 830 million than what it is now, plus also the interest on that debt. What we've obviously seen in the intervening time is we've continued to invest in capital expenditure, which is funded for future generational benefits, and that's generally funded through debt.
I mention this because I think we need to be careful in terms of consultation that we adhere to factuality as much as possible. And clearly, when we look back at the last consultation, one could find problems with some of the statements made. Just, one more question, and it is, again, matter of fact. Is the Mayor or the financial advisors, do they genuinely believe that when they talk about returning Bledisloe Terminal to Council or transferring the wharves back to Council, that this Council actually directly owned the Bledisloe Terminal and Captain Cook and Marsden Wharves in the past? Did they really think that? Is that what you think?
I'd actually like to answer the previous question first, because I don't think we quite got to the end of it. I think that the mayoral proposal on page 8 and the staff advice clearly shows the debt to revenue trajectory heading down. In fact, it gets under 200, 190% at the end of the 10-year period, excluding water care, and that shows that track. And also within although we have gone backwards in the agenda to financial strategy and main budget levers, it does also show that the level is decreasing, or under the proposal is expected to decrease to 270 as well. So that I wanted to cover that one off. I'd also cover off the fact that the consultation document, much like the next one coming up, has to be covered off by audit as being a fair and balanced representation of the aspects within it. But having covered that one off, I'll go to the next question.
Well, I think the Auditor General has to take some of our comments on trust rather than interrogating every line. And as I pointed out, the claims are not especially factual. Now, coming back to the question about...
Sorry, I disagree with that. I very much base all of my responses on a factual position.
Okay. We expect the ratio to shift below 220% with the sale of AIAL shares. Okay, we'll leave it at that and agree to differ. Can we move on to my next question?
Point of order.
Can we move on to my next question, please?
No, hold on.
Look, I'll tell you what, you're making
on.
some fairly severe
Can I finish my point of order,
accusations.
Mayor? It's on disrespectful language. We've had a lot of disrespectful language over the last couple of weeks, months, days, and we can disagree with officer advice or your advice, but I think the behaviour towards officers needs to change, and the next 6 months are going to be tough, and I hope that changes. Thanks.
Okay. We can't make accusations.
I am just speaking the truth as I see it. There's no personal disrespect at anyone. The fact of the matter is, are we respecting the public? And I think our responsibility is to ensure that we do.
All agree with that. Now, what's your next question?
Next question, I'm puzzled about this because it's a continuing theme, and it may be political dressing, a little touch of sentiment. Bledisloe, come home, back home to where you belong. But it's all the way through, it's just returning Bledisloe Terminal to Council, transfer wharves back to Council. My question is, do responsible officers and the Mayor believe that Auckland Council once directly owned these assets, rather than owning them as we do, as the 100% shareholder of the Ports of Auckland, or the Port of Auckland, I should say? Returning Bledisloe Terminal to Council, do you not think that's misleading?
I'm going to answer through you, Mayor. I'd answer this as if I was the CEO of ASOL, Councillor Lee. You don't own the land. The Ports of Auckland, which is a limited liability, owns the land, and the council, as its shareholder, has a residual interest after all the creditors of Ports of Auckland are sold and made whole. So a separate legal entity owns that. You don't actually own it, because the Ports of Auckland has raised debt over its operations and over its land, and returning it to you is actually a transfer of land away from the title of a separate company back into Auckland Council, unencumbered, free to do what you like. So there is a difference between the two that I think is quite important to acknowledge.
So, are you conceding that you were mistaken to claim that that Bledisloe Terminal should be, if the Mayor's proposal goes through, is going to be returned to council, and the wharves will be transferred back to council? You think that's accurate? That's being accurate or not?
Yes, I think it is accurate that at the moment the council does not own the wharves. It owns an interest in Ports of Auckland, and if the ports relinquish that land, it will be returned back to the council.
Let's say owning 100% shares of the Ports of Auckland means we don't really own what the Ports of Auckland owns. Are you saying, to repeat my question, that once upon a time we did? Is that what you're saying? Because that's not true.
I'm not sure of the history of the ownership of Bledisloe. I'm just making the point that as a 100% shareholder in an entity, you don't necessarily own the assets of that entity.
Let me tell you, this is misleading language, and we need to correct it. Thank you.
Point of order.
I think it's rather than the ownership thing.
Point of order.
Okay, point of order.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr Mayor. Just drawing your attention to 1.3.2, if there's further disrespect to staff, there are options for the Mayor in chairing the meeting.
Yeah, I've seen that. You can ask them withdraw it, but I'll give the benefit of that gentleman. I'll just try and explain something which may not understand.
Can I just can I respond, Mr Mayor, because it's not the first time that Councillor Henderson had raised the issue of disrespectful language. Being on the receiving end of a malicious story put on social media by Councillor Henderson last year, I think he shouldn't be lecturing anyone on disrespectful language.
Come on. You can't speak to points of order. This is disrespectful. I'll remind the councillor that he called me a hypocrite in the last meeting.
Okay.
That is not true.
It's on the tape. Do you want to see the tape?
Will you guys grow up, please?
Come on.
Councillor Lee, just stop it. I mean, I was about to answer your question before you launched anything. When it means returning the thing so that the public of Auckland can use it. The ownership of the port is in our hands, and the port's assets are in the hands of the port, but we own that. When we're saying we'll return it, at the moment, we, in theory, own it, but we can't even walk on it. So we want to return that so the public of Auckland can use it and enjoy it in its way. So I think the public will probably get to understand what we're trying to do anyhow. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is Councillor Walker.
It's nothing to do with me, by the way. So I've got a question around the port, and it goes in part to these options around the 35-year lease and obviously the status quo. And we've acknowledged that around that 35-year lease, there would be a range of constraints because council has a whole lot of things that we have to do. We've got to reduce emissions, all kinds of stuff. And we have to deal with sea level rise. The port at that location is on the cutting edge, and we can't second guess what's happening there. So my question is, can we have, in what we go out with, some form of risk analysis? For example, there will be risks associated with sea level rise, storm surge, inundation events. Those things impact on the port. There will be issues that go to the growth of Auckland or not. There will be matters that we'll be concerned with in respect of meeting reduction in emissions that could perhaps go to enhancement of rail because it uses electrical power and the like. And my particular concern, and this is an item that goes to risk, is quite obviously if stuff happens and we have to exercise some constraint that we haven't second-guessed, I don't doubt that the other party, whoever they are, will enforce various contractual obligations, and that could cost us a substantial amount of money. And 35 years is a relatively long time. So my question is, because Aucklanders deserve it, can we have some risk analysis? Is that not a fair question to ask in what we go out with?
Fair enough, we'll add that into the advice that we're getting in addition, but in terms of the future fund in itself is a huge risk reducer, because in the event of a tidal wave or a tsunami, one of our major assets won't be any use to us or to anybody else, and suddenly it'll be somebody else's problem, not ours. That's the whole point of us.
I understand that. Having said that, as Mr. Crawford has pointed out, the port is a limited company, and it remains to be seen what contribution the port may or may not be making into some resilience fund, because it is a separate entity, as much and all as it is owned 100% by the council. My other question just goes to the matter of prioritisation, and also goes to council's finances, particularly in respect of these assets being transferred back to be used for some purpose that I'm not hugely familiar with, and that also goes to Bledisloe. And the mantra, well, that's not probably the appropriate term, but the prioritisation, if you like, that the Mayor has got around, fixing things, prioritisation and the like. So my question is, given that the council doesn't have the funds to remediate the Wynyard area, which was an area of port land, and there are substantial costs around that, and the consequences, we've missed out on sale GP and who knows else what we're missing out on. What financial analysis is going to be presented to us around the prioritisation of the existing assets we have that we are not adequately able to fund, let alone embarking on getting additional assets back, about which we have no idea around what the costs are pertaining to those, or the use for that matter. Is that not an appropriate thing for us to highlight and go out with in this plan?
Well, it probably is, but the main assets around ports, around the Wynyard area, are all owned by somebody else who's paying for the insurance. So quite good, we've got some roads down there, but if all the buildings get knocked over, the roads are no good. We can ask questions all day long about the future, but I've found that predictions are very hard about, especially about the future.
I guess my question is around prioritisation and how we can cope with our existing debt and financial situation, let alone burdening ourselves with other problems for reasons that frankly aren't known to me and for that matter to Aucklanders. So can we have some clarity around these things? Because I'm assuming if we're going to fix things, we've already got a bundle of things now that need fixing that we can't fix.
Today's about, the priority today is to get through this. The priority of the fund is to provide some resilience for the future. And so there's a priority. So if your priority is not to have some resilience for the future, you'll be able to vote against this. If a priority is to have some resilience for the future, you'll probably vote for it. So you're at the priorities are in your own hands, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question wasn't to do with the future fund, it was to do around the plan to return some of Auckland's waterfront land against a background where we can't deal with the waterfront land that we've got. That's my issue. And we should make that clear to Aucklanders, because we have insufficient budget for Wynyard as it stands.
That's possibly true. So I'll tell you what, if we get to the end of this, I'll make sure that when the documents, because the documents for consultation will come back for another approval early in the new year. And I want you all to read them along the lines of, are they actually explaining to Auckland the concerns that you do have? And I think that's a very good point. So we will make sure that the documents, and I can see Tamsin at the back noting these things right now as we speak. So there you are. Thank you very much. And I'm going to move to Councillor Henderson. If you can manage to get through yours of dignity, I'll be pleased.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I suggest, well, I'm going to try my best anyway. I've got a question, 3 questions on 3 different topics. So, look, I'll start from the bottom. In terms of the net zero by 2050 figure, would advancing work on that include working with Auckland Transport to produce a proposal that is more climate friendly than what we have today? I'm not sure if that's a staff question or a mayoral question.
I think that we will be meeting with Auckland Transport every year, every month for the next 10 years anyhow, and that's a constant focus. And it's something or other else that goes into the whole thing. We have to provide a mixture of climate things, and we also have to provide services to people on the buses and roads for those people who haven't got a bus. So it's an interesting question, but I don't know whether my mayoral plan can actually answer that.
Cool. Second question, just in line with emissions. So when we're talking about our own emissions profile, do we price in our airport shareholding as part of that emissions profile, or is that a separate thing? Might be a staff one. How do we calculate our emissions profile, and does airport shares include or not included? Oh, hello.
Sure, I'm Adrian Bouzeril. So at the moment, the airport share are not included into our inventory. We account for the direct scope 1, 2, and part of the scope 3 emissions. The airport are not accounted on that. We account for the emissions from the flights as part of the regional greenhouse gas inventory, but only for domestic flights and not necessarily for the international flights. So if we expand a bit more our reporting on the scope 3, that's definitely something we should include in our reporting, because that's something we have potentially the control of. So there is always that discussion about do we have control over that asset or not, to account for the emission or not. At the moment, it's not accounted. If it is, and when it will be in scope 3.
Thank you, that's really interesting. So on a completely different
If you sell the shares, we don't have a problem, but somebody else does.
Right.
I don't think that actually helps the atmosphere or the glaciers, but you can feel better if you don't own it. It's like the Australians. They dig up the coal and they accept no contribution to greenhouse gases. So they send it to India, who burn it, and it's all theirs. The whole thing is fraught with hypocrisy.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm suggesting that we might need to be running a rule over those emissions, and that's a regulatory function as well as an ownership one. My final question's on ports. Again, I'm not sure where to direct it, so I'll just throw it out there. But given collective employment agreements only last for 3 years or less, how are we proposing to protect the terms and conditions of the workforce in any lease arrangement?
Through you, Chair, again, that would come down to a negotiation and could be a condition of the lease, like many other things. They can be written into the terms of the lease in any sort of respect you want, but obviously, as indicated, it could and it may have an impact on value.
It's done in Australia and all of those ones, and they come to an agreement beforehand, and the unions are usually involved, actually.
So can I confirm that it would be up for negotiation and also potentially variation along the 35-year time frame?
You can confirm that we'll protect the position.
Through Chair, we can take that approach if you want to. Yeah, that's absolutely has been done in Australian leases. There are many terms and conditions which are imposed on these leases, and these Australian port leases have been operating for a number of years now without significant issues.
Okay, just in terms of significant issues, are we concerned about the developments in Melbourne where there's been some serious issues?
We've learned from those. I went into those. They were issues, and the contract allowed those to be determined and resolved. And the same, that's the one that they all rush to as an example. But just about every port in Australia runs this way at the moment. So, and it's just something else to be. I mean, we have had under our own ownership, we had quite a few things, including dead people Councillor Leone, please.
Kia ora, Mayor. Yep, I've just got a few questions. First one is around the ports operation. So I just want to take into account the discussion that's taken place around the Australian experience of leasing out the ports. And we know that that has led to some major increase in costs of moving containers. So will any of that information be included in the consultation documents?
Well, through you, Chair, to the extent it's irrelevant and informs the public, then it can be put in there.
Okay, so it will go into there, some information around that.
Through you, Chair, as I said, to the extent it's relevant to what we're proposing, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Around the future fund, based on the current projections, I know that we've raised this earlier too, the income, projected income of 180 million a year. So we're looking at a difference of 80 million. 50 million we currently get we're working towards to be getting from the ports in our current scenario, and 50 million from the shares per year. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, I think that's loosely correct, yes, based on the current assumptions and the proposal.
Okay, so just based on those numbers, can we, I mean, have we got some assurance here that a risk analysis on the future fund has been done, or, you know, has been processed, given that we haven't had the independent review completed on that yet?
Through you, Chair, as the Pricewaterhouse point out in the paper you've got yesterday, which is some preliminary advice and issues, that's further work which has to be done, especially looking at the returns, the assumptions in there, are they reasonable? Other factors such as likelihood of losses in certain years, etc., etc. Also the extent to which drawdowns will be sensible and things like that. So your question is a good one. There's further work to be done to inform the consultation document.
Okay, and we can actually still separate out the money that would be received from the future fund and the rest of the budget?
Yes.
Okay, and then just a couple of final ones. Just in terms of the release of Captain Cook and Marsden Wharves, I just wanted to get some confirmation there. So once they are returned, does that mean that they could actually be sold in the future, or is there confirmation that they will be open space or used for developments?
They won't be sold, but what we would do is we would presumably, and we're asking Iki Panuki to come up with what's the best use for both the public, and that. This is very similar to what we do with Iki Panuki when we flog something or other in Pukekohe and we're going to turn it into a town centre. We'll get it back and do the best thing we can for us, for the people. It's just another asset recycling like what Iki Panuki have been doing for years for us.
Okay, so there's no plan to sell them?
Oh, absolutely. There's no, I didn't get this back to sell it. The money has been shown to be in continued ownership of these, and I think some of the redevelopment around the Western Viaduct, all of which is lovely. The mistake was that the council actually flogged the land instead of flogging the lease to the land, and and Mark Wyborn and his mates have made the money out of that rather than us. Now, I don't make mistakes like that. We'll keep that and we'll see what we can use it for. Okay, so there is no intention to sell the land ever.
Okay, just final comment. Look, I've noticed, and I think I've read this in some of the other budget committees, around the lack of Māori outcomes that's been presented in parts of the plan that's been put up to us. So I just wanted to get an idea if there is anything that we're aware of behind the scenes that we know could possibly be around partnering with iwi, like, for example, reaching net zero. That's an opportunity that we could be, making that really specifically clear to partner with iwi to reach that.
I'll have a go at this, that's okay, but in terms of all of this bit there has options with iwi involved. And for instance, in the event that we decide to even consult, and we're only consulting on the possible leasing. Iwi interests have already contacted me that they're very interested in possible involvement here, and the New Zealand Super Fund and those sorts of people there are all in the background. Nothing's been decided, nothing's been talked about, but as soon as you say something, all hands go up, and the hands have gone up from iwi as well. So that's seen as an opportunity rather than a cost. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for the 101 on ownership, John. Clear to me. Can I just unpack the reply from you, Peter Gutzel, on the port company came to us in a workshop and said we have to buy Captain Cook in Marsden, and then Peter, you're saying that that's budget neutral because it just recirculates. But there was a missing piece, and my recollection is that for the port to vacate Captain Cook Marsden, they had to undertake capital works at the end of Bledisloe North. And that work was in the vicinity of 70 to 90 million. So I want to understand the budget implications. If there's an expectation that the 70, 90 for the release, the sale, purchase and sale of the land just cycles back, where does the capital expenditure come from? Now, I didn't know we had Roger Gray on the line. Roger, if you're still there, I'm not sure whether he is. Roger, if you've heard that question, I'm not sure whether you were online before, Roger, and you may have heard Peter talk about, the recirculation of that 70, 90 that you'd receive for us for the sale would be budget neutral. But my understanding is you still need to find the capital, which I thought was going to be that money, to undertake the capex on Bledisloe North. Can you unpack that for us, please?
Yep, I can. Can you hear me all right? So
you might need more volume, please.
Yeah, it's not. I'm sorry. We're just going to log in a different system in a second, but I'll answer the question as best I can now before we go onto a separate system. If the council were to pay us the 70 million we need for the valuation, we would use that 70 million to build Bledisloe North. Now, if there was a circular transaction and it was simply passed back to you in the form of a special dividend, then the port would incur additional debt of 70 million to build the Bledisloe North Wharf. So it's not a circular aspect for the group. There would be an additional expenditure, and we would need to spend up to about 40 million on a second car handling facility because of the loss of the parking area on Cook and Wharf. So whilst I understand Peter's perspective, there would be an increase in debt for the port if we were not able to use those funds.
So that's
if I could answer that as well, please. So the difference here is the consolidation aspects of the group for that payment versus the need to then invest further or to spend some money, which will require debt or equity funding to make that work. So that's the second part that Roger is talking about, and that would be included within the option analysis that would need to be consulted on as it goes to the payback and the benefits of doing so.
So you're getting into a deal here, guys. There's also the aspects of what the leasing arrangements are between bits and pieces at the moment as well. So we're just going to go out to consult on whether the overall idea is going to do, but we're not going to become real estate agents or bargainers here, please.
No, not trying to do that. I'm just trying to understand it. That's all.
Okay, good.
So just on that. So at this stage, there's no need to provide something in budget for that transaction where the transaction also includes the need for capital expenditure at Bledisloe North and the car handling facility. At this stage, there's no need.
In the financial modelling we've done to support the proposal, we've made a provision of that 70 million. So it's kind of factored into the debt numbers. Exactly where and how that's accounted for, we need to work through. but we've kind of anticipated that under this proposal that would be needed, and so we've factored that into the debt projections.
Yeah, but is that CapEx on Bledisloe North factored in?
Yes, yes.
It is, you're saying?
Yeah,
it is?
yes,
Okay.
but which entity that sits with and how it gets accounted for, we need to work through.
Okay.
But as a group, we've anticipated that there would be 70 million extra debt required to support what has been proposed. So that's built into the financial projections at a group
Okay.
level.
Is there an allocation for, say, Eka Panuku to investigate and plan for the future use of Captain Cook Marsden? I just can't find that particular budget line. Is it within a broader program of Eka Panuku?
In our modelling, we haven't added any extra provision in for that. Whether Panuku have capacity to do that, I'm not sure. We'd have to.
So something would have to give in the Panuku program to accommodate that spend. Yeah. Okay. Mayor, can I just come to your draft proposal, because we're on the same section, aren't we? This is not port related. It's I'm coming into the very last bullet point under strengthening council's financial, and that is advance work to reduce council emissions and reach net zero by 2050. If I can just home in on that. In your draft proposal, it read quite differently, actually. It reads, set ambitious but realistic targets to reduce emissions and reach net zero by 2050. Now it's been changed to not the emissions of Auckland, but the emissions of council. It's narrowed down dramatically. That is a fundamental change. Can you explain that? And does it still anticipate the emissions reduction plan and the VKT work, the vehicle kilometres travelled work that our staff are working on now? Because it reads dramatically reduced.
Words that confuse that, then that's probably wordsmithing rather than actually. Max will try and dig me out of this one here, but there's quite a lot of words in there, and you've done the usual Derby scoring a point by finding something wrong there somewhere.
No, please don't say that. Mayor, I'm actually trying to get clarification.
I withdraw that.
As a governor, you're here to verify before you rubber stamp stuff.
I withdraw that.
Thank you. Councillor Darby, the intent of the revised wording is to clarify that we are not, the Mayor's not asking the organisation to change its targets or to set new targets. And that was, but instead he's clarifying that he'd like the council to continue to advance work towards those targets. So I think that was a point of clarification that a few councillors wanted us to clarify, and that's why that wording has been changed. Of course, I remind councillor that doesn't form part of the items for consultation which are being decided today.
Okay, satisfied with that. Thanks.
Good question. Thanks for raising it, Councillor Bartley, please.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to follow on regarding your comments about the PwC and that there's further work on assumptions on the returns. Do we need this information to be able to decipher the financial benefits to be realised?
Through you, Chair, so you'll have further information by the time you need to make a decision in February on the consultation document. So Pricewaterhouse and others are working on that analysis now.
Would it be going against staff's own advice then? Because we're advised to consider budget options and solutions. One of the criteria is credible. And in being credible, we should look at the items for public consultation should only be included if and to the extent that the council can credibly follow through and realise the financial benefits. If we don't have that information, then isn't it right that we should not go out for consultation on this?
Through you, Chair, by the time we go out for consultation, you will have that further analysis and information.
Thank you. And then my other question is, what is the more prudent position for us? Is it receiving dividends where we have received advice for future projections of profit, of more dividends coming back to council, or this income from a potential lease of the port?
Through you, Chair, the financial information analysis we've done to date indicates that a 35-year lease of the port would be financially more beneficial than the current present value of the dividend projections.
Okay, thank you. And then I suppose my question is, even up there in the Merrill proposal, it says, talking about two options to get a better return from port operations. In here, it then goes on to point 155, where it says that actually it's doing better. The returns are actually improving. How do we get a full picture so that the public knows that, you know, the port is actually performing well?
Through you, Chair, so that's why you've had some initial advice and analysis from Flagstaff, and the Investments Political Working Group has commissioned some further advice to essentially check and verify some of the assumptions which Flagstaff have made.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. My questions are probably to the two Johns that are there, but for the councillors that have been talking to me about why we should do this, my question is, since the disestablishment of the CCO that we had, Auckland Council Investments, there has been perhaps a question mark put over the oversight that we've had of these valuable assets. By that I mean both the port and airport shares. So if we weren't to proceed with the Merrill proposal for consultation today, is there anything else that you would offer by way of additional oversight that could be provided? I mean, I've drawn my own conclusion that there does need to be some oversight, and I support the Merrill proposal, but I just wonder if you could highlight the importance of these assets and what will be required going forward. I mean, I've got a second question to Roger Gray, and that is, you know, how important is it to the profitability of the port that they have certainty in terms of tenure on that site? But either of the two Johns, can you give us an understanding of where we might be looking to provide greater oversight on these assets?
Through you, Chair, look, it's a difficult one to answer. When we have with the port, obviously we appoint the directors and have the normal control and influence as a 100% shareholder. I think when it comes to the airport, look at it as a pure financial investment for us. I do struggle to see as 11% shareholder or even 18% shareholder where we would be adding additional value, and for example, where we would think they are not performing and where we think we could add value to that. I'm not sure anyone else can add anything to that.
So my second question, it follows on from Councillor Bartley, that we've had the Flagstaff report that was commissioned in the last term of council, and there have been ongoing improvements, as we understand it, with operations at the port. How important is it that, in terms of obtaining this information that a lot of councillors are asking for, in part it's that review of the Flagstaff report in light of current port operations, because things change, and secondly, there are things that we won't know in terms of the scope of that review, how officers will continue to work through those things that might become apparent during that review to ensure that there is sufficient flexibility to give all councillors the absolute current information that they require before it's finally adopted in February.
Through you, Chair, so I think the further independent advice that the investment political working group is seeking will provide that assurance, and if necessary raise issues and questions for debate.
My question is to John Crawford now, in terms of your experience from Auckland, from Treasury and Auckland Council. While we are today wanting to drill down and get into very precise detail, would there be matters that might arise during the review that we mightn't anticipate at this stage? And how best can we provide the certainty that we are looking at all of the options to ensure that all information will be available to councillors before February?
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. So I think in the first instance, what the working group has asked is for a review of Flagstaff's latest advice. Now, some of that has been, over time, Flagstaff or the council has put up certain options which have been taken off the table through that, so they've arrived at a particular option or preferred option, which is the sale of, or the lease, the sale of the lease for the operating business. So some other options, for example, the one of the port leasing the land from council and port business being separated, I think have dropped off along the way. So one of the questions around the scope is how far back in history does that review go, and whether councils want to redebate some of the issues that I'm not privy to, but presumably occurred during the Flagstaff advice, which I think has gone on for 12, 18 months, maybe 2 years. So I think that needs to be sorted out within council, as are they looking for someone to review purely the work around the sale of the operating lease, or are there further options or further work that council wants to initiate through this review?
For instance, as they work through that review, if they were to throw up issues, I mean, the Mayor has put into this plan the importance of moving freight to rail. If there are going to be requirements around rail, and that's going to sit inside the integrated transport plan, any of those issues that will look at the issues around profitability of the port, will they become more apparent as we work our way through this?
I'll possibly speak on behalf of Roger as well, because he's an important part of this process and this equation. But as you go down this road, and it's a process that you'll go down, and you're looking for advisors, or you're looking to make trade-offs about a large number of things, one of which is timing. And you've mentioned, as the port shows greater improvement over time, that will give investors greater certainty that their financial outcomes can be met. But similarly, investors and indeed the port are going to want to know, what are the plans for electrification, what are the plans for rail capacity, so that all parties have got a clear idea as to whether the wider objectives of council can be met through this process.
What assurance can you give us with the reviewers that there can be no commercial gain made by them at some later point in terms of the integrity of these people and the independence of their advice?
I'll answer on behalf of both Mr Bishop and myself. One of the challenges in finding an independent advisor is that most firms would prefer to retain the option of working for a potential bidder for the ports, and so we made it very clear that any independent advisor would have to disclaim and commit not to work for any potential bidders in the future, in order to make sure that they didn't have commercial information which they could exploit themselves, but B, so that there was no screwing of the scrum in terms of their potential advice. So that has limited the pool of potential advisors very significantly, and I'm confident that we have recommended someone who does have the independence and who is willing to forego any future opportunity with potential bidders.
My last question relates to the establishment of the fund. We've seen in the past funds that, with the best intention in the world, have been diverted into other situations. How can we be assured that if the fund is correctly created, that those funds will be solely for the issues that we are looking at today, and that is in terms of self-insurance and climate resilience? Can you give us some advice, either of the Johns, or I know that Jazz Singh has been working on this as well, that we can have the confidence of knowing that should a fund be established, that those funds can't be raided in the future?
I think I'll also ask John to answer this, but one of the things I do know from experience is when you have a high-profile fund that the public believe is their money and they see some benefit from, it makes it very hard to raid. So, central government might have raided your funds in the creation of the super city, but I look at something like the Auckland Electricity Consumer Trust, which a lot of Aucklanders believe they own and they certainly get a benefit from every year when they get their cheque in the mail. That sort of public identification and involvement with a fund, I think makes it much harder for the proceeds to go elsewhere.
Thank you.
You don't need to answer that. Well, it's been brought to my attention that under our rules, we're not allowed to go more than 4 hours without a break. And 3 hours, what?
We reconvened at 11:30.
11:30, yeah, so whatever that, anyhow. We've been going, it just seems like days to me, but since global warming started this morning, we've now reached the time where we have to have a break. So I've only got 2 more questions left on this section. I was hoping to get rid of the questions on this one, but when we come back, Councillor Fulapona and Councillor Fully have listed a question, unless, of course, you want to ask the guys in the meanwhile we're having a pee. So we're going to break for 25 minutes. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. 1:45.